I had 54 days and 13 hours between the time I heard the words, "I'm sorry, it's cancer," to doing the first actionable step was being admitted in the hospital for my mastectomy. When I first heard the words that cancer was my gift, it really hurt because I had this ingrained belief that whatever bad happened to me in my life was because of something I had done wrong. Here I am, nurse practitioner extraordinaire.
Yeah.
And if I could mess it up so bad, then they ought to feel better about their own journeys.
Today's conversation goes deep into the realities of a cancer diagnosis, the grief that accompanies it, and the courage to grow through adversity. Today, I get the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with Agalia Baker and her new book, If Cancer is a Gift, Can I Return It? Welcome to the CARTI Hopecast, where we explore stories that shape us, journeys of resilience, hope, and perseverance. We seek the lessons that emerge when we face the unexpected and find strength in the struggle. I'm Adam Head, your host, and today I have the privilege of speaking with Agalia Baker. Agalia is a retired board-certified family nurse practitioner, cancer veteran, and author of If Cancer is a Gift, Can I Return It? Her story sheds light on the emotional chaos of a cancer diagnosis, the importance of mental health, and how she transformed trauma into a catalyst for healing and advocacy. Let's dive into her remarkable journey and the wisdom she has gained along the way. Agalia, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the CARTI Hopecast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by your book's title, just to start. I want to get into that, but first, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
What inspired you to frame your story in such a provocative fashion?
When I first heard the words that cancer was my gift, it really hurt because I had this ingrained belief that whatever bad happened to me in my life was because of something I had done wrong or that I was inherently flawed. And I thought that if I had so screwed up my life, and this is what it took to get me on the straight and narrow, then I must be flawed to the core. And I couldn't handle that. It told me I didn't deserve to live.
Just going into the writing part of this, you said that cancer wasn't a gift, but a catalyst for transformation. And in your book, you chronicle your journey through some pretty raw and vulnerable storytelling. Did you know when you began writing that it would end up being this authentic, or did that really take shape over the course of your own cancer journey?
I knew it had to be because the big part of getting through this was facing who I am at heart. And how could I ask someone else to look within and face who they are if I wasn't willing and vulnerable to put out my journey? And if nothing less, people can look and see, just so here I am, nurse practitioner extraordinaire.
Yeah.
And if I could mess it up so bad, then they ought to feel better about their own journeys.
Yeah.
And how they managed to get through it. Just wanted to say it's okay.
Yeah.
However you get through it, it's okay.
Well, it certainly seems to communicate that. And in it, you describe the emotional chaos that can come with a diagnosis, the sleepless nights, the overwhelming fear. What strategies helped you regain a sense of stability and control, especially during those early days?
I didn't have any. And that's why the impetus for the book.
Yeah.
I really had to struggle to get through it. It had to come within. It took time. I had 54 days and 13 hours between the time I heard the words, "I'm sorry, it's cancer," to doing the first actionable step was being admitted in the hospital for my mastectomy. And that was 78,540 minutes of pure torture. And I didn't want anyone else to go through that. That's why I'm here today.
The waiting.
That's
a lot of waiting.
It's a lot of mental torment.
Yeah.
Of what is going to happen to me, what is going to happen to my life, how my relationship's going to take this, what am I going to do, am I going to lose my job, can I afford this? So many things come running to your head. It's crazy making. all these racing thoughts.
Yeah, every worst case scenario.
And it usually happens around 2 a.m.
Yeah.
when you're trying not to wake everyone else in the house and you're just pacing the floors.
Mm-hmm. You were talking about earlier, as we were having a conversation, your clinical hat and your background. I wanted to speak to that for a moment. So, Agalia, you wrote, as a nurse since the age of 19, I thought I knew everything I needed to know about breast cancer. You go on to say, what I went through stunned me to an extent I felt totally powerless in what was happening to my body, my life, my mind. In that way, with all your years of clinical experience, did it make aspects of your cancer journey harder than you think it perhaps would have been otherwise without that clinical background?
Well, I didn't work in clinical oncology. So most of my years were in intensive care. Mm-hmm. So what I saw was end stage and when things went wrong. And then in the last years when I was a nurse practitioner, I was doing screening. And most of the times if I did discover something or was able to uncover something, these women disappeared. So I didn't see what was happening. Mm. So I knew all of the horror stories.
Yeah.
And I was afraid that was going to be my life. So it made it a little bit harder, knowing what was going on. Now, as far as getting through it, as far as what was happening to me, that went out the window. I was just like anyone else, just fighting my way, struggling, trying to understand why I was so devastated. Mm-hmm. I couldn't understand what was going on. And it wasn't until I was getting through the process that I realized that what I was experiencing was grief. It was grief because I lost the life I had thought I would have. I was losing my breasts. I ended up losing my profession, my job. Mm. I ended up losing some relationships, some that really did need to go, but they're loss. And with all of those losses comes grief. Mm. And with grief has stages, or phases as I like to refer them to. And if I understood at the time what was going through, that I could have gotten through it a little bit better. That's why I wanted to frame things from a nursing standpoint. This is your brain on grief. This is what is happening. Mm-hmm. And if people understood that just being told that you have cancer is a traumatic event in itself. And whatever you hear after hearing the word cancer is a trauma response. It feels like a death threat. And anytime we're threatened, our brains do exactly what they're supposed to do. They go into survival mode. Mm-hmm. Your brain tells your body to fight or flight or freeze. And all your logical thought processes go out the window. Even your emotional status gets put on hold because you'll think, I will think about how I feel about having cancer if I survive. And if you had asked me at that time, did I need any emotional help? Mm-hmm. I would have said, no. If you want to help me get this cancer out of my body now. But wasn't that the time that I needed help the most? When I was so terrified of what was going to happen to me that I couldn't even think straight? No logical thought processes are even possible. And I was having to make all these decisions. Did I want a mastectomy? Did I want a unilateral, bilateral? Did I want reconstruction? If I did, what kind of reconstruction? How am I going to get the time off from work? Where am I going to get the money to afford this? How am I going to get my rides? Am I going to do the chemo? Am I going to lose my hair? All of these things start rushing in when you don't have the logical process. So you hit the shock and the denial. And that is... I wanted to show how the stages or the phases of grief are actually helpful. There are ways to process the trauma of a radical change in your life. We have a tendency to view grief as being something we got to shove down, get around, get over. Mm-hmm. There's expectations of how much grief you can show or how long you can be in grief and exactly how it's supposed to look like. And I just wanted to show that this is what's happening. And if we change that perspective of it, grief being the horror of what happens coming afterward, but our bodies processing what has happened. And we stop fighting it and accept ourselves through every phase, then we don't get stuck, and it passes a lot easier.
You were talking a bit just in discussing grief, some of the losses there. Word comes to mind, just identity. You've talked about some of the physical losses that you faced, but as you're thinking about the emotional losses, you mentioned the professional loss even. How did you begin to redefine yourself after losing so much of what had perhaps originally shaped your identity as a person?
Well, I realized that I had tied so much of my identity up in what I do rather than who I am. I remember years ago actually in a resume writing class, just define yourself. And everyone started out with what they do or who they are to someone else, like I'm a wife and mother, or I'm do this or I do that or this profession or with that. We don't ever start out with who we are at heart. And this showed me that I had tied too much of who I am based on what I do. And when I couldn't do that, I was devastated. I had to change that. And that took a lot of self-acceptance.
Yeah.
That who I am at heart is okay. And it's enough.
You challenge, even in the book's title, the common language around cancer, rejecting terms like gift, certainly, or even battle. Why is it important to you to redefine these narratives, and how do they impact the healing process, you think, for others?
When you think of a gift, you think of something pleasant. Other than the fact that, I thought it was pointing out where I had so badly screwed up my life, and this is what it's going to take to fix it. Whenever we were first working on the book cover, they sent these copies to me, and it was these pretty pink boxes with this pretty pink bow, and I had this visceral reaction to it. No, breast cancer is not a pretty pink bow.
Yeah.
It is not this fluffy feminine thing. It is a disease process. It's not a gift. And why are we tying it up into something pretty and pink and sweet? That's not right. It's not a gift. It is just a catalyst, like many different catalysts in many people's lives. It's not a judgment of who we are. It's not what it takes. When I think of the gift was within me, because cancer didn't choose how I adapted to it or how I chose to respond to my cancer. I did. To say cancer was my gift is to give cancer that power. No, I am the gift, because that power is mine. I made the choices. Cancer didn't do it for me. And even if I chose not to change, that's my choice too.
It's kind of taking the power back that it needs to take from you.
Yeah.
You kind of shifting gears just a bit, but still in some of the themes that you hit through your book. You certainly weave humor into an otherwise heavy topic, usually for everyone. Often,
isn't cancer heavy enough?
Often using the traumatic moments in your own treatment journey really as a springboard for using some of these humorous anecdotes or your descriptive language. Why was humor an essential part of your storytelling? Because as I read your book, I mean, it's woven throughout in different points. And how has it shaped your perspective also maybe on your journey?
Well, sometimes humor can be a stress reliever and can be a way to cope, but I think it's also a way to connect. And isn't this topic heavy enough without me? I mean, if I were going through it again, I would think, read about someone else's miserable accounting of their experience with breast cancer. I can't handle that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to lighten that load. I don't want to put more burden on these people going through cancer right now, going through cancer treatment. They don't need that. They need to know that there's a lighter side. And they need to know that there's life on the other side.
Well, your use of humor is certainly very clever that you use throughout.
Well, I do have an odd sense of humor, and sometimes it's gotten me into massive trouble.
I liked it. I liked it. Early on, you felt isolated in your journey, and you described that. How did you eventually find the support that you needed, and what advice do you have for others seeking community for any difficult time that they face in life, whether it's cancer or otherwise?
I didn't find the support. I had to create it myself, and that's why I wrote the book. I had to find ways to get through it by myself. And, I did go through this before all the Facebook communities came out. But, you're talking about advice for people that are, with all the social media that we have today, you might want to go a little carefully at first, because at first you want a lot of support. So you want to reach out, and people, when you put your story out on social media, you're opening the floodgates for their reactions, because people see what's happening to you through the filter of their own trauma and experience with cancer. And their reactions are not always positive, and it's not personal, but it sure feels personal.
Yeah.
And everyone has an opinion, and everyone is more than willing to tell you what you should do with your life. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right way for you, and you can be guaranteed that none of the opinions will agree. There's no one right way to get through this, and no one else can tell you what that way is. You have to find it within yourself.
A million connections, but maybe not many or very few that actually know the real person that you are and what you're dealing with. Yeah, there's wisdom in that. You write about grief, and you talked about it a bit earlier in some of the stages, not just as a response to death, but to life's changes. How can people, in your opinion, honor their grief while also embracing the natural growth that it can bring, whether they desired it or not?
Well, what I hope to lay out in my book was to people to understand what is actually happening with the grief process. Grief is what is natural coming after a loss. And it is something we've always thought we had to push down, shove away, get through, manage, like as punishment for having something go wrong in your life and this terrible change. But if you understand what is happening, that grief is what the brain is supposed to do to help you manage and process this change that's happened in your life. If you understand it's biological, it's not something you can control. It is your natural survival instinct. And that if you just allow yourself to experience what is happening, instead of trying to stop it or mitigate it, then you don't get stuck in it. You realize, okay, this is a time I'm trying to figure out all the ways to mitigate my consequences. So this is bargaining. If I take this supplement, maybe this won't be bad. If I do this, maybe that won't happen. Maybe if I take this course, I can have this miraculous healing and not have to go through all of this hell. Just understanding what is happening to you helps you to understand that this is necessary. And when, depression hits, and it will, you'll know this is my time for internal reflection, that I need to just look and see what no longer serves me.
I've heard that word said before by clinical psychologists thinking about what no longer serves you.
Yeah.
And it certainly can speak to season of life, or I've heard it in the context of a traumatic experience.
Mm-hmm.
And life is just different afterwards. And you talked about it with friendships and other things. Mm-hmm. You've spoken about the need for the medical community to better address the mental and emotional health of patients. What changes would you like to see in cancer care, and how can others advocate for themselves, as you mentioned?
Well, from a clinician's perspective, I believe that emotional support should be part of the standard protocol right at diagnosis. In fact, I think a mandatory meet and greet with a counselor before a plastic surgeon. Let's deal with the impending loss of body parts before we focus on the physical aspects of our body. Saying, if you go to a breast surgeon, okay, well, you're going to have them whacked off. Then you go into a plastic surgeon and say, okay, we can put these artificial objects into your chest and it'll all be okay, like it never happened. And that's not how it goes. That totally bypasses what happens inside.
Taking a moment before the tactical part happens, so to speak, and let's talk big picture, what this is really going to mean for you in this change. Toward the end of your book, you describe finding a sense of freedom from expectations, trauma, and even self-doubt. What does freedom look like for you now? And how has it shaped your life?
I'd love to go there, but I want to go flip back to the clinician hat. I still got my nurse hat on.
Sure, go for it.
If you had an upfront meet and greet and someone, an explanation of what services are out there or what is they can take advantage for, even if right at diagnosis you're not really capable of acknowledging the help, and you may think it's unnecessary. Let's just cut right to the medical aspect, because survival brain is. And we all get tunnel vision. Let's get the chemo started. Let's get the cancer out of my body. Let's do the radiation. Let's do all the medical treatments. That's surviving. But if you got that in there, then a little bit down the road, maybe before, before my, in my 54 days and 13 hours, when I had the thoughts of, what is going to happen to me? What is my life going to look like? Then I could remember that there is a place to go. There is someone I could talk to that is specifically for this reason. And I would not feel so alone, so desperate.
That's good.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back there.
No, I think that's a great thing to add.
Oh, and one more thing. Even if, they didn't need help, maybe years down the road, if you had a baseline evaluation and, how much information would they do? A baseline information would give the clinician insight to a person's ability and willingness to even follow their treatment protocol.
Yeah.
But if things went south later on, you would have a starting point. Okay, we were here and now we're there. And, this is a direct relationship to what's going on. So it would be really helpful if we did have more, if it was a part of our standard protocol. Instead of what it is now is, if you have some trouble later on, talk to your medical professional.
Yeah, more of a reactive versus let's create this baseline, this grounding to start. And then we're here for you. So going back, was just talking about freedom that maybe you're experiencing, and fast forwarding to Since the book, with all that's happened and now where you are right now, how has the freedom that you've experienced from some of the things that you wrote about very honestly in the book, what does that look like for you today? How has it shaped you?
Well, with acceptance, I realized that to accept what has happened to me is self-acceptance. And that was huge in my life. And also, when I think back 4.5 years ago, I was so frozen with inflammation in my body from a ruptured silicone implant that I couldn't raise my arms. I had what we call T-Rex arms. I couldn't fold a towel. I could barely get dressed. I struggled, and that's why I couldn't do my job anymore. I have to do women's exams, and I couldn't push the drape back over a woman's knees. If I had a tall girl on my table, I couldn't raise my arms high enough to palpate her thyroid. And my life became 24/7 pain. And with that, it stole my joy for life. It stole my compassion. I love being a nurse, but I became a not very good nurse because I just didn't have the life to give. And when I got the implants out and went flat, I realized that my femininity is not tied up on how well I fill out my blouses. And that is very freeing for me. And maybe because I'm past my warranty date, but no one ever notices how flat I am. If I ever mention it to someone that, in passing, they're surprised, and because no one seems to notice. And it's very freeing. But since I was so frozen, I started getting, after I get the implants out, I started getting the range of motion in my arms back. And it just became like, if this is possible, how much more is possible? Yeah. And it became, I don't have to go to the gym. I want to go to the gym because I want to see how much more I can do and how strong I get. I've become a gym rat. I've lost some weight. Yeah. I've lost some, that poo belly you get when you're flat. And, I'm not built like Winnie the Pooh anymore. And I started not being afraid of death. I started being afraid of not living my life to the fullest with joy. Wow. So I started traveling, and it meant I had to travel alone. My husband's not physically able to travel. My best friend's a little afraid to travel. And I just wasn't going to let that hold me back. I was going to go. My dad infected me with the travel bug, and I have to do it. So I just booked some trips all on my own.
That's wonderful.
And I've gotten to do so many things, and I just want people to realize that there is life after cancer. There's a glorious life after cancer.
That's beautiful. Agalia, thank you for sharing your story and your insights with us today. Are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience?
I just want anyone diagnosed with this to know that they're not alone, that those racing thoughts that they have, those fears, they're all normal. There's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing broken. They're normal, and this too shall pass.
And last but not least, where can our listeners find a copy of your book?
Well, it's on Amazon, Goodreads, through the publisher. There's a link on my my webpage. It's bcveteran.com. Also, the audiobook will be released in January.
Yeah, you were just talking about that.
Yeah.
Which, that's going to be great because I can only imagine how you tell your story and even some of the humorous parts, what that's going to be like you actually reading it yourself.
Yeah.
So, Agalia Baker, thank you so much for sharing your story. I appreciate the conversation today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. You can find If Cancer is a Gift, Can I Return It? and it is available now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.